Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about, yes, the 2028 presidential election. Even though obviously it's still very far away, we did just get a new poll from Yahoo and from YouGov that I think is very interesting. I want to talk about and do a video about. So two parts here. One, a new Democratic primary poll shows from YouGov and Yahoo that Gavin Newsom has 21%, Kamala Harris 19%, Pete Buttigieg 10%, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with 12%, Josh Shapiro 4%, Tim Walz with 4%, and 9% split up in other. Now, overall, the average right now on Race to the White House shows a much closer race, with Kamala Harris at 19%, only 0.2% now ahead of her fellow California Governor Gavin Newsom. The trend in recent weeks has been, for sure, that Gavin Newsom is gaining steam. Now, of the three most recent polls, two out of the three, one from Emerson College and one from Yahoo and YouGov and Yahoo, I don't know why those are so hard to say back together, show that Gavin Newsom is now the leading Democratic candidate for 2028. And I've explained in past videos, but in case you're new to my videos, first time watching, I'll explain this just again very briefly. Obviously, the 2024 presidential election happened. President Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris to become the next president of the United States. Now, in the following days, weeks, months after the 2024 presidential election, Democrats were asked who would they want to see be the Democratic nominee for 2028. And almost all the polls showed Kamala Harris as the leading candidate to be the next Democrat. Now, it's very interesting because obviously she just lost to Donald Trump in 2024, but a lot of the early polls right after an election takes place, they'll have the candidate that lost as the general election be the most likely candidate to be the nominee for the next presidential election. Because at this early point, most of these other candidates that could run, like even Gavin Newsom or Josh Shapiro or Tim Walz or Pete Buttigieg, a lot of them are not super well known to Democrats who are not really hardcore invested in knowing everything about the party. Which means the candidate that most people have heard of is the candidate that often leads. That's why Kamala Harris's name started out as the front, as she was just on every single person's ballot in the United States in November of 2024. So when Democrats are asked who should be the nominee for the next election, it makes sense that Harris would be leading. Now, I said at the time, and I'm still saying now, I fully expected her support to dwindle over time as more of these other candidates begin to seriously take steps to run for president in 2028, and as these other candidates begin to get more well known. And we started to see a little bit of a shift in April, where Pete Buttigieg in the Atlas Intel poll showed a lead over Kamala Harris by about 4 points. But for the most part, Harris's lead continued until the next Atlas poll, which showed Buttigieg leading over Harris by about 16 points or so. And then you start to see some other polls into June and July where things really start to shift. Emerson College has Buttigieg at 16 points, and towards the end of June, Gavin Newsom with 12%, Kamala Harris only 13%. Overton Insights shows Harris leading when all of them are in the race. Now, as you get closer into July and into August, there's certainly been a shift in the 2020 Democratic primary early on so far. Yes, it is very early on, and we have to take that into account. Atlas Intel still has Pete Buttigieg defeating Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom at this current point in time, but now Gavin Newsom is the one in second place at 15.8%. Kamala Harris is in third at 14.5%. Echelon Insights still has Harris leading, though, in their poll from July. Now, in August, Kamala Harris 26, 13 for Newsom, Buttigieg 11. Morning Consult, Harris 29, Newsom 19, Buttigieg at 9. Emerson College, this is a big one. Gavin Newsom up to 25%, Harris down to 11, and Pete Buttigieg at 16 for one of the early first times, showing Harris's numbers falling out of the top two. McLaughlin has Harris still at 27, though, Newsom at 18, Buttigieg down to 9. Now this most recent poll from YouGov and Yahoo shows Newsom at 21, Harris at 19, Buttigieg at 10. So what does this all mean? Well, Kamala Harris is still leading either at or near the top of the 2028 Democratic primary, as to be expected at this current point in time. Again, she's one of the most well-known Democrats in the Democratic Party right now. But Gavin Newsom, over the last few months, has certainly seen his name ID rise and his support among Democrats for 2028 rise. Again, in the early spring, Newsom was polling around 4, 5, 6%, depending on the poll. Sure, he's one of the names that probably a lot of Democrats had heard of, but he was not at the levels he is today. Where you come now and you see him 25%, 21%, 18%, 19%. Newsom's support has at least doubled and then some from back in March and April. Again, obviously it's very early on in the 2028 presidential process, but it's very clear here that Gavin Newsom has been the Democratic candidate that has been surging in these polls. And it's even usurped Pete Buttigieg in many instances of being the second place Democrat to Kamala Harris for a time now. He is now very squarely as the first or second Democrat for 2028. Now for 2028 on the Republican side, right now obviously it still remains J.D. Vance's Republican primary nomination to lose, where he's leading in every single poll. The only way it even gets remotely complicated would be if Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, were to run, though as he and Vance are very close friends, and he's obviously President Trump's vice president, I don't think we're going to see anyone from the Trump family run against J.D. Vance in 2028. But we also have a general election poll. Emerson College has J.D. Vance leading over Gavin Newsom 44.4 to 43.5. And I don't have it pulled up on the page here, but I did see some polling from this Yahoo YouGov poll that showed Newsom leading over J.D. Vance 49% to 41% in an 8-point lead. Now, first things first, I do think that certainly, compared to what the 2020 election will eventually end up looking like, there will never be a 9-point electoral vote or a 9-point national vote win for a Democrat or Republican in the United States, probably ever again in the modern political era where everything is so polarized and so divided. I seriously doubt we'll see anything remotely close to that. Just to give you an idea, 2008, which ended up being the largest political victory we've seen in a very long time, Obama got 52.9% to McCain's 45.7%. So, just quick math here, that's what, about a 7-point win for Obama over McCain. For Newsom versus Vance in that poll, that would be another 2 points on top of what 2008 was. We're just not going to see that in a presidential election in 2028. Doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican, the country is far too divided to see anything like that. This is also after the market crashed in 2006, going to 2008, and it was still 7 points, not 9. But that being said, what does this mean for 2028? Because obviously we're still very early on in the process. Gavin Newsom now seems to be factoring in as either the number 1 or number 2 Democrat for 2028. Well, now we start to have the conversations. Because right now, President Trump and his job approval rating, last time, I'm going to refresh the page here, just give you the most updated numbers from Real Clear Politics. Trump is currently sitting at 45.4% approved to 51% disapprove. So Trump is currently down about 5.6%. And when you look at Trump overall, when he took office in January 2017, he started out, when you look at the approved unfavorable or so, relatively around -6. Come November of 2020, when he runs against Joe Biden in his re-election campaign, Trump is currently sitting at approved 46%, disapprove 52.1, roughly a negative 6-point differential. Joe Biden wins a very close election. Now, obviously, President Trump is a very unique political figure in American politics. There are not many, if not any, candidates on the Republican or Democratic side that motivates their core base of supporters out to vote like Donald Trump does. We see this in the difference of Republican voter turnout between the midterm elections when Donald Trump is not at the top of the ticket and presidential elections when Donald Trump is. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you have to accept the reality that President Trump brings out his supporters to vote. And then you see that come again in 2024, where Donald Trump, entering Election Day, he's down about 7 points or so on the favorable ratings. So President Trump, based on the actual margin, has really not changed too much from Election Day. Now, on the start of his second term, Trump's approval ratings were up to about 50.3%, disapproval's down to 44.8%. So the polls reflected that President Trump started out with a bit of a popularity boost heading into the start of his second term. That has completely gone away. He is now back to pre-election levels at 45.6% approve, 50.9% disapprove. The question will be obviously, what is this like in 2028? Because this plays a massive role in the 2028 election. If President Trump is at levels like we saw potentially around March of 2023, where he was down about 20 points or so. If that's where he's at come 2028, it's going to be very hard for any Republican, let alone his vice president, to win the 2028 election. But if Trump is around the same numbers he is now, where he's loved by Republicans, hated by Democrats, and then independents will make up the decision and the factor in the election, it's going to be another competitive election in 2028 that both Democrats and Republicans are capable of winning. Another important factor for 2028 that's often getting overlooked, though, is the popularity of Vice President J.D. Vance, who, despite the fact that he's still relatively pretty unknown despite being the Vice President of the United States, is pretty much in lockstep with President Trump on the approval issue. He's currently down about 6 points, 41.4% favorable, 47.4% unfavorable. Now, the good news for Vance is that he essentially has the rest of the Trump-Vance term to have the American people get to know him, and if he does run for president in 2028, the presidential campaign for the American people to get to know him. So Vance has the opportunity to invent himself or reinvent himself to the American public in a way that they have not yet really seen of him, other than that one vice presidential debate, where it depends on who you ask. Democrats say Tim Walz did well in that debate, but in most cases, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats will probably agree J.D. Vance ended up winning that debate overall. It's more of a close split than it probably was on the actual debate day, but Vance did overall win that debate when you look at the opinion polling following that debate. But still, how many people in America are going to remember that come 2028? Probably not a very significant amount. So Vance for 2028, facing off against someone like Gavin Newsom, is going to be very interesting because in both cases, it'll be two new candidates that will essentially be really getting to know the American people, getting to know them for the first time. It'll also be the first election since 2012, the last time that Donald Trump was not the Republican candidate in that race. Obviously, it was Barack Obama versus Mitt Romney. 2016, Trump became president. 2020, Trump lost to Joe Biden. 2024, Trump defeated Kamala Harris. 3 elections in a row now, Trump has led the Republican Party. This will be the first presidential election since then where Trump will not be at the top of the ticket. And in many ways, Trump has changed the electoral map a lot due to his presence being the Republican candidate. States like in 2012 that are now Republican states weren't like that. Iowa was a blue state. Ohio was a toss-up state. Virginia, for that matter, is also a toss-up state. Florida went blue. Nevada went blue. Now, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the 3 Rust Belt states all went blue for Obama by more than 5 points. 2024, Trump won them all. Nevada went red. Arizona went red by 5.5%. Wisconsin went red. Michigan went red. Pennsylvania went red. North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, Florida. What will this map look like in 2028 if that matchup is Gavin Newsom versus J.D. Vance? It's going to be very fascinating and maybe a very important election for 2028 because every 4 years we hear this election is the most important presidential election of our lifetime. It's going to be said till the end of days, this is the most important presidential election. As important as 2024 was, the potential for 2028 to be the most important presidential election is certainly there, because this will be technically the first presidential election in the post-Donald Trump American political world, where even if it's J.D. Vance, the vice president of Donald Trump, he will be obviously representing President Trump in the Trump administration, but his name is J.D. Vance, not Donald Trump. So what does the post-Donald Trump Republican Party look like? Are they able to hold on to the gains they've made in the Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania? 3 states that in Trump's 3 presidential elections were absolutely crucial to his pathway to victory. Is J.D. Vance or any of the Republican candidates for 2028 able to carry 1, 2, or all 3 of those states in the post-Donald Trump Republican Party? Or, with Donald Trump not running, we saw Kamala Harris, despite losing these 3 states, Harris did not lose by a tremendous amount. Like, it wasn't like a 7 or 8 point victory for Trump. Trump only won Wisconsin by under 1 point. Trump won Michigan by about 1.5 points. Trump won Pennsylvania by about 1.7%. So Kamala Harris lost all these 3 states by under 2 points. If there is a big enough swing and President Trump's numbers are down, we may see Gavin Newsom carry all 3 by more than 1 point but under 5 points in 2028 without really too much of a challenge depending on the election. These states that have moved a lot to the Republican direction are not so much out of reach the Democrats can't flip them back and do so by decent margins. We just saw Joe Biden do this in 2020, literally mirroring the exact results of 2024, Wisconsin was under 1, Pennsylvania under 5, Michigan under 5, Pennsylvania under 5. In 2024, Wisconsin under 1 for Trump, Michigan under 5, Pennsylvania under 5. So we just saw this. We know it can happen in 2028. What do these states look like in a Newsom versus Vance election where Trump will not be at the top of the ticket? Do Republicans turn out in the same numbers for J.D. Vance that they have for Donald Trump? Thus far in midterm elections in the Trump era, they have not. Can President Trump and the Republicans and a post-Trump party do that? Can Republicans, can J.D. Vance hold on to North Carolina and to Georgia? Two states that were Republican former strongholds in the Romney era and even into the Trump era to an extent, but have been trending more towards the Democratic side. After 4 years of population growth and in an election environment in 2028 that we don't know really what it's going to be like, can Vance hold on in these two very crucial Sunbelt states? Arizona and Nevada, two states Donald Trump won in 2024, Nevada and Arizona. Nevada and Arizona both trended very significantly to the right from 2020, about 5 points each towards the Republican side. Can J.D. Vance and the Republicans hold those two states that Trump gained on in 2024? These are all very big questions. And what kind of candidate is Gavin Newsom? What if Vance and Trump are so unpopular, but also what if Gavin Newsom, come 2028, is very popular? What if Vance is so popular and the appetite for change from Americans is so great, Vance flips back Nevada? Vance flips for the first time North Carolina since 2008. Vance flips Georgia like Joe Biden did in 2020. And what if Arizona, despite voting by 5.5% for Donald Trump in 2024, what if Newsom is able to win Arizona? This would get Newsom to 275. That would mean Newsom could win the 2028 presidential election without even having to win Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania, with everything else from 2024 remaining constant, with Trump winning all the other states that he won, and Vance winning those, and Newsom winning all the states that Kamala Harris won. There's a possibility, depending on 2028, Newsom could win without even winning any of the Rust Belt states, where even if Newsom were to, say, win Wisconsin, but lose Pennsylvania, and then Michigan's essentially a flip, let's even for the sake of argument give Michigan to Vance, Newsom could still win this without winning all three of the Rust Belt states. Vance could win all three, and Newsom could still win. Or how does this all end up going? It's a very fascinating conversation for 2028, and we're obviously way too far out to know how 28 is going to go. But the idea of a Gavin Newsom 2028 candidacy facing off against the Republican Vice President J.D. Vance is something that by each passing day is getting a little bit more and more likely. And now, at the beginning of September of 2025, looking out to 2028, a few years from now, it's going to be very interesting to revisit this and see what ultimately happens for 2028, and is this the matchup we end up seeing? I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts and everything. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you did, and I hope to see you in a future video.